Welcome to our next lecture. Today we're going to be talking about identity theory, and the paper that we read for today was JJC Smart. So identity theory is a materialist theory of mind, and it's also a monist theory of mind. So we looked at Descartes and we saw a substance dualism, where there's physical substance and there's mental substance. Now, identity theory is going to say there's no such thing as mental substance. Rather, there's just physical stuff. And all of the mental life that we have can be explained in terms of that physical stuff. So here's a plausible fact, is that we have brains. Can this material fact of our brains explain everything that goes on in our mental life? And identity theory says yes. Mental states just are brain states. So here are some other examples of identification and scientific explanation. So for instance, water is H2O. Anytime you have H2O, you have water. Anytime you have water, you have H2O. So some of our earlier theories of mind, like behaviorism, said that mental states were like behavioral dispositions, meaning like the things that our bodies do express what our mental states are. Identity theory says that mental states are brain states. So the things that the brain is doing is what causes things that the mind is doing. And in this case, where water is H2O, a mental state is a brain state. So consider how scientific discovery moves from correlation of two phenomena to their identity to another. We observe instances. For instance, every instance of water that we observe is correlated with a molecular compound H2O. And so because every time we observe this, it holds, we infer that water is the same as H2O. So now let's consider the mind and the brain. What sorts of observational evidence do we have? Well, we have behavioral observation plus a knowledge of how the brain works. So we know that for any creature to whom we attribute mental life, other people, for instance, that creature has a complex neural structure, which we call the brain. And there's also scientifically observed mind-brain correlations. You poke this part of the brain and this part of the body moves, this sort of thing, right? We learn more and more about the nervous system and discover greater and more systematic correlations between mental states and processes and brain states and processes. So where creativity resides or executive function resides, these are parts of the brain that we learn more about as we do more brain science. So what should we make of these mind-brain correlations? Well, for the identity theorists, it's going to be a kind of identity. For the dualists, you're going to say, well, there's some relationship, but it's not an identical relationship like water and H2O. Identity theory is that which says the brain states are the mental states. So we get a definition. For every mental state M, there's a brain state B, such that M equals B. So, for instance, if you are having the mental state M, which is pain, then pain is realized in the human brain through the activation of the C fibers. It's a part of the brain that lights up with nervous system response and is the cause of, or the response to it, at least is always coincident with pain. And so the identity theorist says where there's CA fiber activation, there's pain. These are the same thing. So pains, sensation, visual, auditory, olfactory, beliefs, desires, intentions, fears, hopes, these are all numerically identical and just are states of the brain. So correlations between mental states and brain states are law-like. They have an equal sign between them, law-like in the sense of the atomic number of gold is 79. When you have the atomic number 79, you have gold, you have no other element. It's a law, right? So the same thing with mental states and brain states according to identity theory. And likewise, there's this strict supervenience, meaning that any change in the one thing tracks identically a change in the other. So anytime there's a change in a brain state, there will be a corresponding change in a mental state, and any change in a mental state will be explained by virtue of a cause in some brain state. So this is a nice theory because it unifies with science. It doesn't require the stipulation that there's some kind of spooky mental substance or soul or whatever you want to call it. what we get is a perfectly naturalizable theory, as long as you're okay with reducing down everything that's in your mental life to what's going on in your brain. So if that sounds like an okay thing for you, then this sort of reductive materialism of identity theory might be something that sounds kind of okay. And the more that we learn about brain science, the more that we learn about human mental life and their correlations. And so it looks like the identity theory is not just committed to an identity of mental life with brain activity, but seems to track the developing science in brain physiology and neuroscience, neurology, in mapping those mental states onto those kinds of brain states. And moreover, identity theory follows an established theoretical scientific practice, which is inferring the identity of regularly observed correlated phenomenon. So it's not just consistent with science, it's also following in the footsteps of sort of as a kind of practice. But there are some objections. So, for instance, we might say, look, I'm aware of my mental states as, say, pain. I feel pain, but I'm not aware of my mental states as a C fiber activation. When I'm in pain, I say, ow, and I think I'm in pain. I don't think I'm in C fiber activation. So does this undermine identity theory? For instance, like people in medieval times didn't know anything about C fibers, but they still felt pain. Smart replies to these objections by saying they fail to acknowledge that a mental entity can differ in what he calls the mode of presentation. So the idea here is just because you don't know that gold's atomic number is 79 doesn't mean that you don't know what gold is when you see it. It's just that there's a particular sort of identity that gold has that's hidden behind some scientific observation and discovery. Likewise, when you're in pain, you're really just having C fiber activation, even if you don't know what C fibers are. So water and H2O and lightning and electrical discharge, these are different modes of presentation for the same thing. The identities of interest, including mind-brain identities, are supposed to be scientifically established. And ignorance is one thing, but evidence is another. And the one doesn't seem to undermine the other. I'm ignorant of all sorts of things that I don't know. That doesn't mean that they don't exist. And there's another objection as well, which is that mental state terms like pain and desire don't have the same meaning as the terms used to describe neural events. So when I say I'm in pain, I mean like ouch. But when you say there's C fiber activation, I don't mean ouch, I mean some kind of brain neuronal activity. And since the two categories of terms differ in their meaning, they can't be terms for the same thing. So given these semantic differences, mental states can't be identical to brain states, says the objection. But again, Smart replies to this objection. He says, the objection that mental terms and neural terms differ in meaning, so mental states don't equal brain states, fails to distinguish the sense of a term from its reference. So we should distinguish between sense and reference, where the sense of a thing is like the cognitive significance and the reference is the thing picked out by the term. So the teacher of Aristotle and the author of the Republic are both Plato. These are different senses, right? Because the teacher of Aristotle means something different than the author of the Republic, but they have the same referent, which is Plato. So they're identical both to Plato, but they tell us sort of different things about Plato. A famous example from history is there was an evening star and a morning star, and it was a big controversy when it was discovered that these were the same thing. They were both Venus. There's the same planet as the reference, but the sense is the star that appears in the morning and the star that appears at night. So similarly, Smart says, look, there's a sense reference problem going on with this objection, that pain really is C fiber activation, and the referent of the pain is the C fiber activation, and the sense is either the brain stuff or the ouch stuff. Likewise, we might think that there's an objection from qualitative distinctness. So mental properties, for instance, seeing a tomato, are characterized in terms of phenomenal qualities. My visual experience is characterized as red and shiny and round when I'm looking at a tomato. According to identity theory, mental states are just brain states. So either we say that the correlated brain state is red and shiny and round, and that seems implausible. What goes on in my brain need not be red, shiny, and round, but we could alternatively deny that mental states are brain states, and say that, look, the numerical identity requires having all and only the same properties. But if my experience has these properties but my brain doesn't, then they can't be the same thing. So Smart replies to this objection as well. He says, this objection fails to distinguish the properties of the object experienced from the experience of those properties. So granted, we do describe our experience in terms of the properties of the object experienced, and we use predicates like red and shiny and round to characterize our experience of the tomato. However, these are properties of the tomato, not of our experience. My mental state is itself no more red, round, or shiny than the brain state is red, round, or shiny. So this is identity theory as Smart defends it from potential objections. We will look in the next lecture at a knockdown, or at least historically knockdown, objection to identity theory and multiple realizability.